Every so often, we make a mistake in our gardens. Sometimes it's simply planting a plant in the wrong spot and having it die, resulting in a loss. Other times it's a bit more serious, turning into a disaster that results in you having hours of work to do to clean up the mess. And sometimes that happens over multiple years. Well, this video will be a profile on one of those mistakes that I made, which was planting whorled milkweed. So I'm going to make a profile on this plant, and I'm going to include my specific experience dealing with this extremely aggressive native species that benefits so much wildlife. We were going to cover what is whorled milkweed and its pros and cons, the growing conditions and identification, how to grow it from seed, save seed, other propagation methods, wildlife and landscaping, what not to do and how to contain it, and then we will review. Okay, so let's have a closer look at this miniature garden thug. So, what exactly is whorled milkweed? Well, whorled milkweed is a flowering perennial native to North America. Scientifically known as Asclepias verticillata, it will grow about 2 feet tall by 1 foot wide and blooms tons of white flowers for up to 2 months. As a milkweed, it serves as the host for the monarch butterflies and attracts scores of other pollinators. Now, its primary native range is in the center of North America, but there are numerous pockets in the east, southwest, and Rocky Mountains. Pros and cons. All right, so we're going to do pros and cons starting with the pro, wildlife. The number one benefit of this plant is its ability to provide for wildlife, specifically pollinators and as a host plant for the monarch butterfly. But it will bring lots of other pollinators. Some of them aren't as common to view. I see a large number of wasps and other very tiny bees that I can't even identify. The next benefit would be beauty, as this plant is attractive. The foliage looks good before it gets eaten by the monarch caterpillars, and the flowers are attractive too in their own right. Short. So this is one of the shorter milkweeds, not growing above 2 feet tall. So if you don't want to have a lot of tall plants around with milkweed, you can grow this one. Okay, let's talk about the cons. And there's really just one con of this flower that I'm going to talk about, and that's it is aggressive. And I mean it really is aggressive. In an open formal flower bed, it can take over in just a couple of years. That happened to me, resulted in me digging up and carefully pulling rhizomes for some hours one day and covering up other areas with newspaper and cardboard where I couldn't safely dig without damaging other roots. I still pull up the odd plant once in a while now, 4 or 5 years later. Okay, let's talk about identification. So whorled milkweed is often easy to identify once you memorize the milkweed style flower. The milkweed flower structure is common to all Asclepias flowers, has reflexed petals that kind of hang below the flower, looking almost like a skirt, raised hoods, which look like tubes or curved petals, and then these curved horns that kind of angle into the center. And once you memorize that, you can spot any kind of milkweed, as soon as you see the flower. But once you've recognized that it is a milkweed, it's really easy to differentiate because it has very thin, linear shaped leaves, just basically straight line leaves. They're usually around 2 to 3 inches long and up to an 1/8 inch wide, but often thinner. And they'll have the linear shape with smooth margins. And these leaves are whorled. So this is talking about how the leaves are arranged along the stalk. So as you go up the stalk, where you find leaves, it's not going to be one, it's not going to be two, it's going to be several arrayed around the stalk. This is different from most other plants who alternate their leaves, one on one side, one on the other, or opposite, which are paired along the stalk 2 at a time. These will be an array around the stalk at the same place. But that, combined with the size of the plant, often give away what species it is, because this one is really 1 to 2 feet tall, typically. Now, the root system of whorled milkweed is fibrous, but it also makes rhizomes, and that's one of the ways that it spreads vegetatively. These are underground stems that creep underground and sprout up new plants. So it'll look like you had a whole bunch of new plants just show up from everywhere. They're actually clones from a mother plant nearby. But we'll talk about how to contain these later on. Okay, I'm about to go into growing conditions, but I want to point out that all the info I'm going to share in this video, plus more, is at an article on my website. I'm going to link to that below. Growing conditions. Okay, so for growing conditions, whorled milkweed will prefer full sun, but it can tolerate part sun. It likes dry to medium moist soil that drains well, so sandy to loam is preferred. But like most plants, it is, an opportunist, so it may be able to go in other locations than what I've specified, but the biggest threat to it usually is competition from surrounding vegetation. It is shorter, so it's going to struggle if it gets shaded out by taller plants, for example. How to save seed. So to save seed, you do this like any other milkweed. You wait until the pods start opening up and then you collect them. You can place a twist tie on the pod to prevent it from fully opening, which will allow you to leave the pod on until it fully matures. Mature milkweed seeds are a dark brown color like this. Also, you only need a single pod to get a ton of seed. But you can roll the pod in your hands or peel the top slightly like a banana and pull the fluff out in one shot outside. Then you can just dump the seed from the pod. Fully dried seed can be stored for a couple of years in a bag or envelope in a cool, dry, dark place. How to grow from seed. Growing whorled milkweed from seed is fairly easy. The seed has a dormancy mechanism preventing premature germination in late summer. To overcome this, the seed must experience a cold, moist stratification of 30 days or so to allow for a high germination rate. You can do this with a moist paper towel in a baggie in the fridge, or you can winter sow. All things being equal, winter sowing is much easier in my opinion. I have videos on both methods that I'll link to. But for planting seed, whether it's already been cold stratifying or winter sowed, I would just simply fill a suitable container with moist potting soil. Then scatter the seed on top of the soil and give it a light dusting of soil. Keep it moist by misting and place the container in a location that gets morning sun and afternoon shade. Germination will occur when temperatures get regularly into the 60s during the day, or after, a couple of weeks, they should start to germinate. This is what seedlings look like after germination. These are what mature seedlings look like. Once there's 2 to 3 sets of true leaves, you can plant them in their final location. Just remember to protect seedlings with liquid fence or a cage or something, because in my experience, even deer and rabbit resistant plants are vulnerable when young. Propagating by transplanting. Another method for propagating this plant is transplanting new sprouts in the spring. Once you have learned to identify juvenile or emerging plants in spring, like what I'm showing you right here, you can simply dig them up. If you get a chunk of the white fleshy rhizome, at least 3 or 4 inches with the sprout, plant the entire thing at once. So you want to act fast in this, so have the holes pre-dug or pots for transplanting ready to go. Also, keep the pots or transplanted seedlings in the shade for several days. This reduces what is known as transplant shock. You see, when we dig up plants and break the bonds their roots have with the soil, depending on the species, it could take a few days to a week to reestablish that bond with the soil and be able to transport nutrients and water from the roots. Okay, so see here, when I transplanted these, I placed a bench over the top of them to help keep the hot afternoon sun off of them. You don't have to get fancy, just putting a chair over it is good enough. All right, let's talk wildlife. When it comes to wildlife, the flowers produce a significant amount of nectar and must replenish that quickly, in that they're often really busy with pollinators. Seemingly all manner of pollinators are attracted to this flower. Charles Robinson documented over 130 species visiting in his 1929 study. Just a small sample include bumblebees, honeybees, halictid bees, numerous species of wasps, butterflies, and skippers. Oh, and this does include the monarch butterfly, who will lay their eggs on the plant, resulting in their caterpillars defoliating the leaves. Now, some other insects that will also eat the plant destructively are like milkweed bugs, some aphids, and there's some others. But some of the pollinators it does bring in are pretty unique. Like this is a golden digger wasp, and I see these regularly attracted to this specific plant, which is kind of interesting because other plants I grow get different wasps. It's almost like they have their own preferred flavor, I guess, by species. Deer and rabbits. So deer and rabbits will avoid eating this plant in general, as it is quite toxic, as are all milkweeds. However, there are some sources who claim that this is one of the most toxic of all milkweeds. So remember that when handling the plant. Don't get sap in your eyes should you happen to tear a leaf, because when you do tear leaves, there's a white milky sap that comes out. Now, this white milky sap is quite toxic, and you especially don't want to get it in any open wounds or especially in your eyes, where it can cause blindness. All right, landscaping. So for landscaping this plant, this is one of the most aggressive milkweeds in my experience, particularly if you have a more open flower bed or open soil. This plant will form a carpet in a short amount of time. If you've got a wild area like a micro prairie or a wildflower edge or edge of the woods, then it would be perfect, provided it doesn't get shaded out by taller species. But if you want this plant in a formal flower bed, you need to use my landscape fabric trick. I did plant these in pots lined with landscape fabric, and they were contained for several years without issue. Eventually, I didn't water them enough during a drought and they died last year, I believe, but this method does work. I have a whole video on doing it with other aggressive species that I will link to in the card in the top right corner and down below. But yeah, just a little bit of the footage of what it looked like after 2 years of unchecked growth in an open flower bed. It literally went from about 5 or 6 plant clumps to a carpet in 2 years. I apologize I don't have footage from the first year I grew them, which was way back in 2020 when I germinated the seedlings. But I just planted a handful of plants way back in 2020, 6 if I remember correctly, and by 2021 they were sprouting rhizomes, and I thought, I can handle this. Well, I was wrong. I mean, look what happened. In 2022, I got rhizomes that were multiplying from the 2021s, and it just seemed to explode. Let's have a tour. There's one. There's another, and another, and another, and another, and another. And here's another one. You get the idea. So to regain control of the situation, I used a garden fork to loosen all the soil and carefully pull out the rhizomes as best I could. Around a spice bush I was growing, I couldn't do this without hurting its roots, so I just sheet mulched it. I took the original 5 to 6 mature clumps and I placed them in pots lined with landscape fabric, and they grew just fine for several years, although they did eventually succumb to drought. I should have used larger containers, but I would still find isolated sprouts periodically for the next couple of years. Now, I did have a lot of seed pods open up the first year that they really bloomed, and I eventually got a nice patch of these in another flower bed, one that I affectionately call my test strip. Well, I haven't done anything to get rid of them, but they have to compete with a lot of taller plants over there, which has helped keep them in check. So I'll have whorled milkweed forever, I'm sure, and I'm okay with that. But I will not let it go into a more formal flower bed again. All right, time to review. Whorled milkweed is a herbaceous wildflower native to North America. It grows up to 2 feet tall in full sun and medium to dry soil. It hosts monarch butterfly caterpillars and draws in an absolute ton of pollinators. The only real downside of this plant is its aggressiveness, but that can be contained by using a large pot with landscape fabric. See more on my video on how to stop plants from spreading on this topic. But learn from my mistakes and use whorled milkweed responsibly, or in a setting where the aggressiveness is desired. The monarchs sure seem to like this plant when it's plentiful. I had so many caterpillars that year in 2021. But that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video, even if I went a bit off track going into detail in my battle with the plant over the years. But if you got any specific questions, just ask down below and I will try to answer them for you. And I hope you got something from this. You all have a good one.